Jack.
Levi.
The Book Club from Hell.
So today on the podcast, I'm very happy to have Stephen Adubato on of the Cracks in Postmodernity podcast and a large number of other projects, which I'll get you to introduce. I was looking through your writing credits, decided I couldn't possibly intro them all. And we're going to be talking about Slavoj Žižek's 2002 book, Welcome to the Desert of the Real, about 9/11. So welcome on. Thanks for agreeing to come on. Would you be able to intro a few of your projects or the ones you feel are most salient if people want to get a taste of what you're doing?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me on. I've been looking forward to this. My background, I studied Spanish literature and religion in college. I taught religion for several years. But I guess while I was studying, I started to realize that I was really fascinated by how big ideas and beliefs are interconnected with current events, with popular culture, with the way we live our lives. So I kind of moved away from the strictly academic study of religion and philosophy to kind of analyzing that intersection on the ground. And I started submitting my work to various publications because I wanted, I always found reading publicly facing, writing about history of ideas, about, all that kind of stuff to be very helpful. So I wanted to contribute to that public discourse. I wanted to get people thinking, getting them looking at things happening in the world perhaps in a different light. But I also realized some of my ideas are kind of out there and kooky. So I wanted the freedom to publish my own kind of stuff without having to go through the editors as gatekeepers. So once Substack came around, I started this little platform with the writing on the Substack as well as podcasts, and it eventually turned into a print magazine and in-person events, IRL events. And I started getting different guests on the podcast, publishing other people's work. And I don't know, it's become a fun little way to just, again, put ideas out there, get people thinking and asking questions, but also bringing people together for discussion about issues that I think should be on our radars. So that's a little bit of what I do. Yeah. And that Cracks in Postmodernity project, I think, is really cool. That's how I came across you. Would you be able to intro for people a little bit about what the goal of Cracks in Postmodernity is?
Yeah, it's shifted a bit over the years.
Yeah, it's I guess to put it in simple terms, I was exposed to various iterations of postmodern thought, postmodern culture as an undergrad, and there's this, we're kind of told that there's supposed to be this clash between traditional values and postmodernism. And my experience of it was that postmodernism first is calling into question certain truths that we took for granted to be true during the modern era, certain Enlightenment principles. And at a certain point, I understood okay, there's a real need to call into question these truth claims, these assumptions, these cultural norms, because the Enlightenment is a very partial approach to making sense of life and being human. Sure, there's a lot of good stuff worth keeping, but it's not sustainable in the long run. We need to question these things. So I'm really drawn to postmodernism to the extent that it asks these really important questions. It's also something dangerous because it's really pulling the foundation, if you think of Nietzsche, pulling everything out from under, and risks saying, well, nothing's true, everything is purely subjective. Obviously, that's absolutely not a sustainable position to take, but I'm interested in, as someone who I guess you can say has more traditional values because I'm coming from a monotheistic worldview, I don't like this approach of we have to fight postmodernism, we have to, go against it. I don't I don't think it's effective. I also don't. I'm too interested in postmodernism to take an antagonistic approach. So I'm like, okay, let's look at what's going on. Let's weed out what's true and what's valuable from what's not. But I think that it's important that people coming from that, not just people with the monotheistic traditional perspective, but all human beings have that openness and say, okay, like, is there something real? Is there something good here? Is there something false? Let's have this conversation. Let's sort through it. But also, I think like part of my agenda is that in addition to trying to like clarify things and ask pointed questions about what's going on, I also believe that like one of the gifts of postmodernism is this sense of playfulness, this sense that like, okay, well, as much as I believe there are certain objective truths, I believe I'm not the source of that truth. I have a sense of, as a human being, being kind of, the tragic comic position of the human person. Like, I think modernism, because we place so much confidence in human reason, we've lost our sense of humor. Like, we become so self-serious. And I'm just like, no, I'm not God. I'm an idiot. I act stupid all the time. So we need to learn how to laugh to kind of recover that basic humility. So that's why, like, a lot of the tone with which we cover different topics is kind of ironic and playful. Not in the sense, it's not the type of irony that's, self-indulgent, performative, ultimately nihilistic. It's a irony that, again, is the kind of irony of the Jewish comedians and the Jewish prophets who like recognize, okay, we're not God, so that means we should kind of laugh at ourselves a little bit. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to like pin down exactly what we're trying to do, but that kind of gives you a sense of the inspiration and what's going on our platform.
Now that nicely sums up why I pay attention to cracks in postmodernity and why I think people listening should go and check it out. I'll include a link to it in the show notes. That really nice combination of interest in and educated criticism of postmodernity, which is actually kind of hard to find. Is something between just dismissing it as something evil without knowing anything about it, or just accepting it because your professor at college told you that it was good.
Yeah.
So I reached out to you asking whether you'd come on for an episode and said that you could pick a book, I'll read it, and we'll talk about it. And you picked Welcome to the Desert of the Real by Slavoj Žižek, his 9/11 book. He's probably, I'm sure he's talked about 9/11 in other places, but this book was written shortly after it and is very much focused on 9/11. So what was it that made you pick this book?
So I have this kind of perverse fascination with 9/11 that, we can get into that more in a moment, but I recently realized that Verso had this series of, I guess they were lectures originally given by, it was Žižek, Baudrillard, I'm forgetting the last one right now. But, these were, I think it was 2002, they published these series of lectures. So I read the Baudrillard one, and I'm a big fan of Baudrillard. And then I picked up the Žižek one, and I was like, you know what, I would be interested in discussing this on the podcast, because it's an excuse for me to do a deep dive into this text and also to talk about one of my favorite topics, 9/11. But yeah, Žižek is Žižek. He's speaking of playfulness, like, he's a lot of fun. Yeah. So I thought, this would be a good book to cover.
Yeah, Žižek is an odd person to read because I find it's almost like intoxication reading him, in that I have a very good time, and then after a certain number of pages, I have a very hard time remembering how I got to that point. I find his discursive style is a lot of fun, but there's just very frequently I'll be in the middle of him recounting some East German joke from the 80s, and I think, like, wait, how did I get here? What's he talking about?
Yeah, that will happen.
And it's hard not to read everything in his voice as well, at least in my head. Imagining him slobbering over the page with a food-stained Lenin t-shirt on.
Yeah, no, I pictured that several times while reading. So.
Yeah, so this book's an interesting one. We can maybe we can start talking about the main points of the book, and we can weave into that your fascination with 9/11, because he speaks to a fascination with 9/11. I guess you can offer whether you feel it's representative of your fascination with it as well, like how personal it is, or personally descriptive.
Yeah,
I feel like overall, and feel free to offer qualifications or rebuttals, but I feel overall the point of this book was sort of that 9/11, rather than being an attack on America or the liberal democratic way of life, it's an outcome of processes within capitalism, and the responses to it threaten to further entrench liberal capitalist, he calls it expert social engineering, which seeks to prevent anything from meaningfully changing and seeks to neutralize any possibility of a real event or excess that could destabilize capitalism.
Yeah.
Instead, he says we should use 9/11 as an opportunity to recognize our positions and then pursue socialism, because it's
ultimately
Žižek. Yeah. Is that sort of how you read the general structure of this book? There's obviously a lot more underneath that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting because, like, I think it depends who's reading it, like which kind of emphasis you're going to take out of it. Like, as someone who's coming more from a strictly philosophical and cultural point of view, I wasn't like, yes, obviously I pick up on the political emphasis, but I find that like my mind was very much focused on the phenomenological implications of what he was trying to get at. Also, like, having read it after reading Baudrillard's book on 9/11. And I should also mention that the title, Welcome to the Desert of the Real, is, I believe it's from Baudrillard's Simulacrum and Simulations. And it's, comes up in The Matrix in the film.
Yeah, in a beautifully sort of Baudrillard moment. It's Baudrillard by way of The Matrix into Žižek.
Yes, exactly. So no, I mean, I was very interested in, again, like the kind of cultural phenomenology that he reads into 9/11. And I mean, I guess like the easiest example to introduce listeners to. So he talks about the phenomenon of cutting. So, trigger warning. He was saying how teens in the early 2000s who were cutting themselves, people thought that it was, a sign that they hated themselves. It was a way to, do damage to your body because of low self-esteem. But the reality is that he's saying that cutting is a sign that like you care about your existence so much that you need to remind yourself that you're real. And living in a society where everything feels like a simulation, everything feels so unbearably fake and artificial, like people feel the need to inflict pain on themselves to remind them that, like, okay, I am an embodied creature. Like I do live in reality and not just in a matrix. So in a sense, 9/11 is the kind of rebellion of reality within this artificial realm that global capitalism has propagated. It's reality reasserting itself as if it's like, I don't know, it's as if you like bottled it all up, and again, like consumer globalism, capitalism, whatever, is shaking it up, and eventually it has to come out. So I mean, that to me is really fascinating, just considering how, again, like the kind of global economic order fosters this cultural sensibility that is, opposed to reality, opposed to that which is most human. And at a certain point, it's going to have to explode. That's kind of the main theme that I took away, and through which I framed the kind of political implications of what he's arguing. But yeah,
what you were talking about with respect to self-harm, I found his description of the phenomenology of that really interesting, because not only is it you trying to, or someone who participates in that trying to remind themselves that they're embodied, but I think he keeps calling it the 20th century passion for the real, or I get 21st century passion for the real.
Yeah.
It's what a person is doing is they're trying to, in that act, remind themselves that they're an embodied creature, but that's a defense against this creeping sensation that they're just dissolving in hyperreality, which Žižek seems to be saying, no, that's a real thing that they're trying to cover over, that reality as well, with some countervailing reality of being embodied. And I found that really fascinating. Yeah,
no, absolutely. But yeah, no, and then he also talks about this jouissance of the real, or the explosion of jouissance. I don't know, and like this sense that I love how he calls into question this false juxtaposition between like the liberal democratic West and the Islamist fundamentalist, third world, we can say. And how, I mean, this is a theme that we see also in like Adam Curtis's documentaries, but obviously, Western capitalist powers had their hand in propagating these Islamist regimes, both in terms of like fanning the flames of their resentment towards the West, but also actually funding some of these jihadist groups. So I think on one hand, like, yeah, there's this, like, he's questioning, like, okay, is this really, the old world trying to fight against us developed, evolved people in the West? No. But also this, like, he really kind of digs into the nature of fundamentalist Islam and how, like, again, there is this desire for God, for the absolute to reemerge in a world where, again, like, we create a God out of capital, we create a God out of certain very powerful people. So it's this, in a sense, it's this religious ecstasy that's encapsulated in the explosion of the flames. Yeah, but again, it's like there's this sense that there's something that's being suppressed within the current global order and that it has to come out, it has to explode. There's this need to, again, have this jouissance, this kind of climax, this orgasmic explosion of the thing that has been suppressed all this time. Yeah.
Would you mind giving people some definition of jouissance, just in case they're not familiar? Because I know there are at least 3 different ways that Lacan uses it, and then even more in Žižek. But so to give people some ground to stand on.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the only thing that comes to mind when I think of jouissance is there's a small book by Jean-Luc Nancy, who is, I think, a French phenomenologist. But I mean, I guess it depends on how you look at it. But like, yeah, like it's this climax is this, in a way, a sexual kind of pleasure or enjoyment. But I don't know. Like in the Lacanian sense, I'm not sure like how exactly it's defined.
Yeah, well, it also depends on when you're looking at him.
Yeah.
It keeps shifting, and then I think Žižek kind of takes it in a slightly different direction again, to the point where I'm also not totally comfortable giving like a precise psychoanalytic definition of jouissance with respect to this particular book, because like I'm just not familiar enough with the entire sweep of Žižek's work to say which one particularly he's using.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I guess you could say it is broadly a drive or a form of pleasure pushed beyond the pleasure principle. This drive towards something that caused pleasure, pushed to a point where you begin to experience it at pain, yet the drive itself continues towards its object. And you can think about maybe an addiction is one way in which you could think about it.
Yeah. No, like surpassing this kind of limit, this boundary. Yeah. Surpassing it. Yeah. No, I can see it that way. Yeah.
One And this felt very much like Baudrillard. One aspect I liked in this book is when he's talking about how the attacks on the World Trade Center were the entry of sort of fantastical screen images of destruction that were seen in Hollywood films or news programs documenting some atrocity in other countries, breaking into American social reality, and how Žižek describes it both as, I guess, real life, however you wish to define that, intruding upon America, but also bringing that hyperreality of all of these Hollywood images, all of these news images into America and blanketing America in those images and fully saturating it in that way. I mean, I'm not sure how old you are. I remember seeing 9/11 on the news and being sort of
I
too
saw it
young
in person, actually.
Really? Okay.
Part of my fascination. Yeah.
Do you feel like that description of it as both an intrusion of something real and of something hyperreal covering the United States, and I guess by extension, the world that is subject to US media, with hyperreal images, bringing it into that catastrophe film space? Do you feel like there's something there?
Well, this is kind of where my obsession comes in, because, and I mean, this shows up in this book, but also in Baudrillard's, that we have become so accustomed to these spectacles, especially through Hollywood, through watching movies and watching TV, that there becomes this urge develops in us to see this, this like artificial spectacle become real. There's this need for the explosion of the real, for reality to assert itself. So when it actually happened, like this thing that is the stuff of fantasies becomes reality, it's horrifying on one hand, because you could die. Like when I was a kid, seeing it happen, living through it, there's this fear, like, what if they come over to New Jersey where I am and they bomb me? And yet I couldn't stop watching TV when I got home from school that day, because like this thing that, again, it's the stuff of fantasies that you watch on screens is now happening. And I actually saw it all the way from across New Jersey. So it's like this, the promise is becoming realized. This thing that the fact that the fantasy is right in front of you now. It's I don't know. Like I couldn't help but feel allured, fascinated by it. But even the fear that they're going to come to New Jersey and bomb me, like there was something very exciting. I mean, I hate to say it, but as a kid, I was just like, I don't know. It's on one hand, it's like this urge for the fantasy to become real builds up, and then it's realized in front of you. But it's also the this is maybe a little bit more Baudrillard, but like this being bored with life in the consumerist liberal West, like where we don't have. I mean, Žižek does get into this, how like we don't have anything that we would die for. Like we live for these one comfort after another. We want to acquire more and more things. Like this is what life has become for us. So like when there's a threat to that very mundane consumerist lifestyle, it's like finally there's something real now. Finally there's something that's life or death happening. It's not just going shopping, going to the supermarket, watching TV. So this is part of why, like, this is, I don't know, there's something horrifying and yet fascinating about what happened.
Yeah, he does, he refers to this in a few ways, how he talks about how there's, so I guess with that neutralizing aspect of capitalism and liberalism that he says is spreading over the world and provoking responses in certain places. Like he says, the Middle East, one of the responses is Islamic fundamentalism, this attempt to cling to something real or firm in the face of this neutralization. And he proposes a subjectivity of someone carrying out a suicide attack, saying that it's almost they're trying to prove to the big other that they too believe. They believe in what the big other says is real. And in committing that act, their faith is demonstrated. And he contrasts this with someone in a Western country who never faces that.
Yeah.
And I found that really interesting. I'm not sure, to what extent, maybe he's not taking their faith seriously enough. Perhaps they actually do just really believe in God and are willing to die in God's name. And it's not an attempt to demonstrate to themselves or the big other that they do have faith. But it's really interesting. I'm not actually sure where I come down on that.
I mean, I'm thinking about when he compares Hegel and Nietzsche, and how I think he says like Hegel represents the West as master. Sorry. And Nietzsche represents like, I don't know, I guess like radical Islam. You know what? Sorry, let me just go get some water because my throat is.
No worries.
Actually, give me 1 second. I'll be right back. All right. So Nietzsche. What was I saying? So Žižek is comparing the Western capitalist powers to radical Islamic countries to Hegel and Nietzsche. So Hegel representing this kind of passive nihilism, the master, versus the Nietzschean Islamic countries that are, the servant, this kind of active nihilism. And he's saying it's actually contrary to popular opinion. It's the West who are the servants and these Islamic powers that are the master, because they're not a slave to themselves. Like, they're not afraid to die for some higher ideal. Whereas in the West, like, we're so attached to pleasure and to comfort that we become slaves, we become servants. So yeah, and again, like, it's interesting how he calls into this question this common understanding of, these radical Muslim terrorists trying to prove a point to the West, trying to get some message across. And he's saying it's not exactly that they're trying to get a message across to us or like let out their frustration on us, but they want to realize this kind of divine jouissance. Like, they want to actually give their lives to what they believe is a divine mission. Whether it is another question, but in their minds, like, no, there's something truly fulfilling about this radical kind of violence.
And how much of it is provoked by exposure to the same forces which have led to that passive nihilism in the West? Because I think he collects these things under the broad aegis of postmodernism, this rejection of any great ideological cause to be fought for, and promotion instead of subjective practice, instead of some larger scale narrative to coordinate people. Yeah. And he says that Oh, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
And he says, the consequence is not that objective reality disappears, but that subjectivity disappears into, he calls them, trifling whims. And the rejection of those higher goals and a focus on survival and health, a long life, Žižek says ends up robbing any of those things of meaning. And he says, we're merely alive. And posits Islamic extremism as a reaction against exposure to that.
Yeah, I mean, this is another thing that's tricky because, like, you have the West's different analyses of radical Islam. Like, you have the kind of neoconservative talking point that, look, Islam, it's a violent religion. They're against us peace-loving, civilized Westerners. And then you have the kind of liberal version of like, oh, but this isn't real Islam. Like, these are just crazy people. Like, real Islam's about peace. And Žižek calls all this out. He's like, no, first of all, this attempt to understand Islam from the outside is being made in bad faith because, like, it's presumptuous of us as Westerners who aren't Muslim, presuming, to claim to know what real Islam is. But also, just objectively speaking, neither of these analyses really get to the root of what radical Islam is. On one hand, yeah, like it was funded by certain Western powers, like these Wahhabists, like this, like the Wahhabist school of jurisprudence, which is not a traditional one, like it's very recent, was kind of propagated by, or like at least funded by people in the West. But also just from a theological perspective, like it's a very modernist, like kind of, in a way, it's like a Protestantization of Islam. It's like interpreting the text according to my own terms, not in dialogue with the larger tradition that transcends myself. So on both like a sociological, political level, it's very modern because it's a reaction to what's going on in the modern West, but also like theologically speaking, like this is a very, like it's an anti-traditional way of looking at the Islamic tradition. But ultimately, I think there's also, like this is where the Lacanian interpretation comes in, is that I think these Muslim countries are recognizing that I think they're kind of frustrated that they are allowing themselves to get looped into this kind of capitalist, godless paradigm. Like like they're selling their oil to make lots of money. Like they are becoming modern capitalists, but they want to preserve their traditional moral values. So in a way, they're attacking the decadent consumerist West, attacking America as a way to project their resentment towards themselves for falling captive to this mentality rather than actually confronting their own consciences. So, I mean, there are several levels of this critique of like the standard dichotomy that we think of the West versus Islam.
Right. How about this? This is actually something that only just came up, maybe even a provocation. So, take it as you will, but you talking about Wahhabism as something new, something, if not anti-traditional, then something that at least is not traditional. Is that a development in Islam of making it more amenable to capitalism and more easily appropriated by it if you remove that ballast of tradition? You saying it was sort of a Protestantization?
That's a loaded question that could get me in a lot of trouble. I mean, again, like I'm not Muslim and I'm not a scholar of Islamic jurisprudence. I'm just like, got a BA in religious studies. But I mean, I think you could say that was their ulterior motive, that they like wanted to make Islam more amenable to this Western capitalist paradigm. Of course, they would never say that.
Oh, I don't think it's intentional. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same as Christian fundamentalists, like the religious right. These people really believed that they were preserving true Christianity from, these godless, secular, liberal, whatever. But in reality, fundamental, like when you think of these like creationists and, again, the like religious right during the Reagan era, it's not a traditionally Christian hermeneutic. Like it's very, very modern, subjectivist, completely out of touch with the tradition of interpreting scripture and the deposit of the faith. But of course they would never say that because they're driven by this fervor, they're driven by this religious zeal. And I think it's similar in Islam. And this is where like I become critical of the liberal take. They're like, oh no, Islam is the religion of peace. It's just that they're bad apples. There are lots of bad apples in Christianity, but are they committing acts of terrorism? No, that rarely happens. It does. There are Christian terrorists, but, you know, I also criticize like the neoconservatives who would say Islam is a religion of violence. Like I think Islam is very complex, as all religions are. There's an impulse to violence in every religion, including Christianity. But the reality is, one, the founder of Christianity died for his enemies rather than killing them. And I also think there are stronger buffers in Christianity against the violent impulse that are not as much present in Islam. So anyway, I mean, it's just the point is that I don't think we really look at the reality of, I don't know, the historical development of certain concepts, and also again the greater theological implications, which are much more complex. But back to the Hollywood thing, this simplistic black and white Manichaean narrative is much more fitting for the screen. It's much more exciting than looking at the real complex history of Wahhabism and Islamic jurisprudence and whatnot.
Yeah, do you think that Manichaeanism has been reinforced post 9/11 by Hollywood narratives taking it in, and the fact that it is rendered it renders things in a much more exciting way when you have that good versus evil script? Do you think that's been reinforced in terms of the view of the world in the United States, at least during the global war on terror, as a result of 9/11?
I mean, first of all, we have to remember the U.S. is a puritanical country. So, like, there already is that Manichaean strain within our culture and our religious consciousness, that there's the saved and there's the damned, and you're one or the other. It's not like in Catholicism where like, we're all sinners and then we go to confession, and no, like you're one or the other, and that's the end of the story. So there's already precedence for that kind of way of thinking. But also, yeah, like there is Hollywood, there is this fascination with the spectacle, with the extreme narrative of a good versus evil, like the good guy versus the bad guy. And then also I think this narrative, this fantasy narrative, comes to fill the spiritual vacuum. Like the fact that most people in the US aren't truly religious. So now, like, when you're presented this kind of fantastic narrative, you're much more likely to gobble it all up, because you need some kind of narrative to fill the emptiness with. And then it's also like the power of news media, that they know they'll get more people watching if they can sell this fascinating narrative. And like this is something that Adam Curtis covers in like all of his documentaries, how like Hollywood disposed us, or like kind of inculcated in us this thirst for the simplistic good versus evil story. And then when we're presented it as reality, we're like, yes, that's absolutely true. Like, we're the good ones, they're the bad ones. You got to defeat them, the axis of evil, which is, I mean, it's terrifying to think that people are so dumb as to believe all this stuff. But I don't know, like we see it playing out in US politics right now. Like, we're really locked into this narrative, and very few people are willing to think outside of it. But that's the reality.
How about this? So how much of it is people being dumb, and how much of it is a deep need for some sort of, I guess, fundamental stability that's not infinitely changeable or exchangeable? And in going to those simplistic narratives, it's a flailing attempt to find firm ground.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more of a religious, spiritual phenomenon than one of intelligence. I think with Gen Z and with the millennials, I think it's different, because like I think we actually are dumb. 'Cause, like, I see my own college students and I'm like, wow, you can't even comprehend anything outside of this, because like they've been trained to get information from TikTok reels, from very, very simplistic and very stimulating, these kind of like dopamine inducing platforms. So I think younger people don't have the capacity to think like, okay, there might be multiple truths here at times, and I have to like figure out, how do I place them together? How do I consider conflicting narratives? But then I don't know, like I look at people older than me who believe that like it's the big mean orange man versus the good people, and like these simplistic narratives, and they're not dumb, but I think they crave some kind of cause, like some cause that they can get behind, so that they can feel like, yes, I have something to fight for. I'm good. Like I think there's this hunger for some story, to be part of something important, to know that my life is worth something. But sorry, it's Memorial Day fireworks. It's not 9/11 happening all over again. But no, I mean, I think the intelligence question definitely needs to be asked with younger, because we're pretty dumb.
That intelligence question is pretty frightening. That I mean, obviously Žižek didn't address that here, but you would wonder if he wrote Welcome to the Desert of the Real in 2025, if there would be as much emphasis on news media and Hollywood producing these images which then emerged on 9/11, which is important. And I think he's talking about something meaningful here, but also I guess breaking down people's ability to even think outside those particular narratives using Skinner box technology like TikTok. That's it's quite a dispiriting thing you bring up there.
But like but this seems to be like the reality that if this is like the ultimate trajectory of global capitalism, that if there are no transcendent values, there's nothing that's valuable in itself, nothing eternal. There's only the market, there's only profit. There's no such thing as the common good or the dignity of the person. So what do people in power need to do in order to keep amassing more power, more profit, is to really get people to not think, to not ask questions. So we feed them these very simplistic kind of, ways of processing information through a reel, through a 24-hour news cycle, churning out these very simplistic, biased framings of current events. This cycle of hysteria, I don't know, like I don't want to get too much into American politics, but just on a purely discursive level, not on a political level, the fact that the White House is putting out these memes about their policies, and then people get hysterical over it, and they're like, this is a moral outrage, how dare they. It's like people don't realize that this is exactly how they're amassing more power. They're like, you put something out there that's gonna get people all riled up, the media cycle goes wild, and then we move on to the next one and the next one. Like no one actually asks, so what's going on behind here? Like, why are they using these memes? Why the reels? Like, what is the real intention behind all this? Like the fact that we're constantly caught up in the media zeitgeist and the hysteria cycles really distracts us from getting to the root of what's really going on. And I think, back to Žižek, I think he shows us how this was happening almost, 24 years ago, and how, like, the more this continues, like, you see this is how we end up where we are now. But we're in the middle of a process that was going on since back then. Like 9/11 was a really crucial moment in the trajectory of this kind of way of processing current events and information.
And I think it's when he's talking about the more political dimension of this, of capitalism, of digesting all its competitors, something that is, I guess to put it in capitalist terms, non-fungible, or something that's hard to exchange, like a transcendent good, or God, or some belief that is not easily accommodated or traded in a capitalistic sense, is an impediment. And so in that way, I think when Žižek talks about postmodernity as this way of preventing people from ultimately meaningfully discussing the causes of their discontent, I think he's probably onto something there.
Yeah. I mean, but that's the issue with, first of all, with Islam, radical Islam, as a reaction against, global capitalism, that this posture is super naive because it ignores the fact that the nature of the beast that they're trying to slay is so all-encompassing that their attempt to bomb it, to explode it, is futile. Like, it's not actually going to accomplish anything, because then it gets absorbed back into the matrix. It gets absorbed back into the the reaches of global capitalism. And then the thing that I think is more relevant to today is when he talks about the populist right. And on one hand, like, he says something positive. He says the populist right is the only political force that acts, that has any potential in the world today, because it's actually trying to accomplish something, whereas the kind of like mainstream liberal democratic position is to keep anything from happening, to keep everything just to keep the status quo in place. But at the same time, he hints at the fact that the populist right, because it's a purely reactionary force in most cases, it nullifies itself, because again, like, it's a reaction to something that has already achieved everything. So like, even the populist right reaction to the status quo gets absorbed. It becomes part of the media cycle, part of the narrative. And this is why, again, I'm not going to make any statements about MAGA as a political force, but again, just purely on the cultural and discursive level, I think people give MAGA too much credence, because the reality is, like, it's all part of this cycle. It's all part of this narrative, this idea that, like, we're going to fight against, Trump is going to take down the status quo. I mean, it's part of it. It's already been absorbed. So both those who think Trump is the solution and that he's the Antichrist, I think you overestimate the power of such a political movement. But again, I mean, Žižek does say there is something there that's distinct, but does it really have the power to break through?
Yeah.
Really.
So when confronting something this totalizing, which avenues are there for escape? Both at an individual level and then at a societal level. And you can talk from the perspective of Žižek, because he does offer some solutions, or from yourself, preferably both.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I found Baudrillard's book to be, because he's so nihilistic, I actually find him to be more hopeful than Žižek. Because like Žižek, there's a certain level of realism, of seriousness to Žižek, even with all his playfulness. Like, he's trying to push for a radical left kind of politic.
Yeah.
Which, you can support that, that's fine. But I love that Baudrillard is so ridiculous that, like, he ends up being more reasonable. He ends up making more sense, because he knows, like, he's not naive that this system is all screwed up. Like, he's not naive about the fact that it's all a sham. So that's why I find him to be more compelling. And there are these moments towards the ends of Baudrillard's book where he says, like, the only way you can crack through this insanity is through the particular, ultimately through localism. Like, building something very concrete in the most immediate circumstances. Because if the matrix, the simulation is all about appearance, the global, the artificial, then the only solution is to work outside of that system, to fly underneath it rather than fighting against it. Because again, it's all going to get absorbed back into the matrix. So, I mean, I think like everything at the local level, on the smallest level, is like that's the only way that you can build. It's not going to be through fighting on fighting things from the top, you know. So, what does that look like? I mean, this looks like touching grass. I mean, sorry to be cliche. No, it starts with getting in touch with your own humanity, with the people in your family, in your neighborhood, building things at the local level, civic organization, local politics, much more space to actually create something substantial than like trying to get someone to fight against Trump or fight against, you know, global capitalism. And so then on a spiritual level, like there's an image that like comes to mind when I think about, you know, the divine jouissance of the towers exploding. I think ultimately, like, there's something true in this desire of the jihadists to see, to establish communion with the divine. Being willing to risk your life for the sake of being in communion with the transcendent. Obviously, the way that they do it is it's a false transcendence because, first of all, it's immoral. Like the ends don't justify the means. But also, like, I think that jihadists were naive to think that like they can bring themselves into communion with God. Like we can sacrifice ourselves for this divine mission and then, you know, end up with Allah in heaven. Like you're not capable of reaching God. You're not capable of accomplishing this divine jouissance or this communion. You have to risk letting the transcendent come to you. Like you need to humble yourself and open yourself to this possibility of God reaching you. And it's interesting because like I think of, there's this image of Lindsay Lohan when she was out on the town, the paparazzi were attacking her, and then she got really wasted and passed out in a car. And the paparazzi captured a picture of her passed out, and someone on the internet juxtaposed this image of her passed out with Bernini's statue of Saint Teresa of Avila in ecstasy. It was supposed to be a funny little meme, but it was interesting because like you have this woman who's caught up in the global consumerist capitalist zeitgeist. She's a celebrity. She's, you know, become this demigod of the celebrity pantheon that, you know, paparazzi want to eternalize through their iconography, this kind of inverted iconography. But this kind of stardom, this kind of goddess, is not built to last because, again, like it's all hollow. It's all this empty kind of, you know, these empty values that are not capable of transcending the human condition. So she ends up converting to Islam, apparently. But why Islam? Like, why isn't it that she didn't turn to Christian mysticism? Can you hear me?
Yep, I'm back.
Can you hear me? Okay. Anyway, so no, I was saying, so like, yeah, why is it that Lindsay Lohan turns to Islam? I think because there's this extreme devotion in Islam, the sense that, like, first of all, God does not become a human. They don't have a sense of God as incarnate. Like, Jesus is only a prophet. He's human. But God is completely other, completely transcendent. And you're not so much asked to enter into this interpersonal relationship with God. You're being asked to submit, to give yourself completely over to this divine other. it's interesting how you have this person going from the one extreme of like global capitalist decadence, the jouissance of celebrity, of pleasure, money, power, experiencing how empty it is. It all collapses, it explodes on her, we can say. And she goes to the opposite extreme of submitting yourself to Allah, this other divine jouissance. And when I look at the meme of her juxtaposed with Teresa of Avila, you see that like the Christian mystical ideal is, or like Christian jouissance, this like communion climax of the soul with God. It's different because, again, it's the sense that like I'm not trying to reach God. It's like I'm allowing God to come down and reach me. Like the mystical explosion is a much more humble, sedated one. So I don't know, like it's just this interesting juxtaposition between like the Islamic jouissance versus the kind of capitalist consumerist one, and how I think the Christian one is something else that flies under the radar. It requires our humility, our accepting, like I want this transcendence, but I can't reach it myself. And it's not to say that Muslims can't have this. I'm just saying, like, when you look at the two theologies compared to each other, like, it's a different ideal. And the point is that I think this kind of Christian mysticism is much more conducive to that localist approach that Baudrillard is alluding to, that there's this sense of the smallness. Like, we're not trying to reach the heights. We're not trying to have these kinds of wild explosions of divinity, but it's like in the smallness, in the particular, God enters in. So I mean, again, both on like this kind of symbolic spiritual level, but also on a practical level. Like, I think this is like, why are we talking about Trump's latest meme and we're not talking about our local representatives? Most people don't know who their Congress people are or their mayor. Most people don't even know their neighbors. So I think that's the real radicalism, is to start with the small, start with the most human, the humble. And from there, something explodes. From there, something new transcends the system.
Yeah, a retreat from interacting only with images. Because, I mean, to use your example, chances are, for at least all Americans listening, they don't actually know Donald Trump personally. Like, this is not actually a personal relationship. It's your individual relationship with a collection of images and sounds of someone who probably does exist independently of them, but it's like you have no access or no meaningful access to that individuality. So to interact with humans around you rather than images seems like a good place to start.
Yeah, and it's harder because, I mean, it's easier to do symbolic work. It's easier to virtue signal. But actually building something on the ground, building relationships with human beings, it's not easy. It's not fun. It's and again, back to this kind of moral anxiety that drives so much of us, like being in relationship with actual people, building something from the ground up. Like, it's much more morally ambiguous, like, because then you see your humanity coming out. Like, you see your negative tendencies, your capacity to harm others. You have to deal with other people's, moral shortcomings. Whereas when I just say, like, I'm going to take a stand for the right side of history, that's easy. Anybody can do that. But when you're dealing with real people, no, like, things are gray. Like, you see you're not perfect. But that is, again, like, this is why I'm saying it's the real revolution. Like, that's really challenging the system, not posting on X saying, I stand against X, Y, and Z evil thing,
That's quite optimistic, and at least more optimistic of some of my readings of Baudrillard, who...
Yeah.
I mean, I've only read Simulacra and Simulation, but in that he just didn't even really seem to talk about ways out.
Yeah, but that's just, yeah. No, my whole contention though is like, in order to have any sense of optimism, like you have to go to the depths of nihilism. You have to acknowledge how horrible everything is, and from there, then you can actually start to say there are some good things. Like we can actually do good, but if you have a naive position, like you can't actually do that much.
So we tend to finish up episodes by saying whether we'd recommend a book or not. And at least from me, I would say if listeners are familiar with Žižek, they will probably already know whether they want to read this or not. If you like Žižek, you'll like this. If you really struggle with how he writes books, which I did for a very long time, you will have a hard time with this. It's all of the great aspects of Žižek and all of the bad bits, which tend to actually be just the same things. The bits that make me sometimes recoil from him, and the bits that sometimes make me really, really enjoy reading him. The constant jokes, the puns, psychoanalyzing, sometimes just shit tier films.
Yeah.
It's all here. So that's my qualified recommendation. If you like Žižek, give it a read. And what about you?
Yeah, I definitely recommend it. I mean, if you haven't read Zizek before, I don't think I would start here. I think the best intro to Zizek is to watch his YouTube videos. Like, just watch the most popular ones, and you get a sense of who this guy is. But then, I think people who are interested in, analyzing current events, trying to make sense of the different narratives that are fed to us. But also, people with certain, who have political priorities. Like, I think this can be really helpful for you to reframe the different political options out there, their effectiveness. But it's also, as you said, it's very entertaining. One of my favorite jokes is when he talks about Fidel Castro and democracies, or Western democracies' fidelity to castration. So literally, Fidel Castro, this commitment to trying to maintain the status quo and accomplish nothing. They're constantly castrating themselves. I thought that was super playful and, actually made sense in a way. But also just the fact that he goes into the larger geopolitical implications of 9/11, whether you agree with them or not. It's just as a very intelligent, all-encompassing kind of analysis that I think is worth people's time. So
and it's fun, which is say what you like about Žižek. He's always fun, which is pretty hard.
Which is needed, though, because again, like I said, people are so playful, serious. He knows he's a stupid human being. And one of my favorite Žižek lines is when he was critiquing this kind of humanitarian idea that yes, all cultures are beautiful, and he's like, no, all cultures are terrible. They're horrible. It's when you think about it, every culture is horrible in some way. We gotta say it, and we have to laugh about it. So no, it's a fun read. It's maybe not for everyone, but I think it's worth a try.
Yeah, I think your recommendation to start off with a YouTube video of greatest Žižek moments over the years is you immediately get the register that this book is written in from watching those sort of things. Yeah. So anything else you want to say? Any projects that you want people to be aware of before we finish up? I want to say congratulations for the publication of the third Cracks in Postmodernity magazine. If people are interested,
for sponsoring it. Your ad shows up in the third volume of the zine. Just kind of some things to tie up all the 9/11 stuff. So I'm half joking when I say I have this fascination with it. I did literally see it happening. I know people who lost family members. Like, I don't trivialize the suffering at all, but I do intend to poke at the kind of simplistic narrative that, like, you know, they victimized us and, you know, we have to stand strong as Americans. Like, okay, things are much more complex than this, and this is why I think having a certain tone of playfulness when talking about 9/11 is, while it's very morally risky, it's necessary, because I can't take those simplistic narratives seriously. And that's why, like, there's an essay that maybe you can link to for your listeners that I wrote about Stockhausen's claim that, which Žižek mentions, that 9/11 is the greatest act of performance art ever accomplished. Again, that's like a very morally insensitive thing to say, but when you look closely, I think there's a lot of truth. And especially as someone who is fascinated by American pop culture, like, I mentioned this meme with Mariah Carey with the towers collapsing. Like, I think that we need to look at the deeper implications of 9/11, starting with, I think Žižek's book is a great place to start, Baudrillard, obviously, but also works of fiction that touch on the event, like, Otessa Moshfegh's My Year of Rest and Relaxation. Also, Ross Barkan recently released The Glass Century, where the characters live through 9/11. But even, and again, like, I keep mentioning Adam Curtis's films, especially Bitter Lake is a really great introduction to kind of like looking more closely at the narratives that surround 9/11. But yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot there. And the fact that Gen Z has taken to making memes about 9/11 in like recent months, again, like, you can take this very simplistic moral position, like, this is horrible, the Zoomers are so insensitive and nihilistic. But again, I think back to this sense of like 9/11 as this fantasy, as this hyper-real thing bursting forth into our daily lives. In a sense, the meme is trying to grasp this hyper-real event, trying, especially for a generation that wasn't alive for it. So again, the point is, I think there's so much to be learned from looking more deeply at 9/11. Like, we can make a lot more sense of things we're facing today. So yeah, that's my case for thinking more about 9/11.
There is something incredibly hyper-real about endlessly reproduced and slightly tweaked memes of 9/11. It feels like really just an acceleration or a furtherance of endless disaster movies crashing into reality in 9/11, informing their own disaster movies, and then informing these tiny, tiny little bits of information, these image macros, just repeated over and over and over again.
But also the fact that, like, over the years since 9/11, that there's more and more footage being released on YouTube now from all different perspectives. Like, you have tourists with their camcorders. You have like security cameras in front of stores where people were seeking refuge from the smoke. You have like the entire Regis and Kelly episode while it was them narrating what was going on. Like, it's fascinating to piece together all the different perspectives and like, especially the ones where like you see these local New Yorkers, these everyday New Yorkers who are there and like watching how they made sense of it versus the newscasts. It's, I don't know. Again, like, there's the risk of trivializing the suffering, which obviously I acknowledge is a grave thing, but I don't know. Like, I think we need to engage rather than retreat into our simplistic little narratives about the good and the evil, the good guys, the bad guys. Yeah.
I suppose the next step in that process will be AI-generated images of it to allow
that I'm scared of, honestly.
A never-ending depth or false depth of ways to experience it or to relive 9/11, which I'm sure it's coming, if not.
I don't know if, like, I watch a lot of 9/11 footage on YouTube. I don't know if I want to watch the AI. version, because that's, I mean, a terror in itself, but I don't know, we'll have to deal with it at some point. It's inevitable.
Yeah, I feel like it's an inevitability, if not already here.
Yeah.
But it's the next logical stage in this.
It is, sadly. Yeah.
So thank you very, very much for coming on, and thank you for getting me to read Žižek again after so many years of avoiding him.
Yeah, it's always fun to rediscover Žižek, and for those who haven't, again, you should discover him. He should be on your radar. So I hope you do check him out.
Yeah, he's very fun. All right, thanks very much, and for everyone listening, we'll see you next time.